It's early July 1969. The Stonewall Uprising has erupted in New York with clashes between police and LGBT protesters. The Rolling Stones guitarist and founding member Brian Jones has been found dead in his swimming pool at the age of 27. The TV documentary The Royal Family has aired to an audience of 30 million in the UK, giving unprecedented insight into the workings of the royals. It would later be banned by the Queen. And Neil Young has joined Crosby, Stills and Nash to make it Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Meanwhile, the Beatles, well, 3 of them at least, have reconvened to continue working on their latest album, understood to be their last, Abbey Road. This is UnBeatled, the show where we examine each song by the Fab Four. We take a look at the history, the writing, recording and impact of the song, while our resident musician, David Bennett, unpicks the lyrics and music. So please me and like, subscribe and comment to UnBeatled with David Bennett and Donnie Campbell on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we look at Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight. So Dave, welcome. Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, recorded as part of the Abbey Road sessions in July and August of 1969, before being released on the album in September 26th, to be precise, the Abbey Road album. When you think of Golden Slumbers, what's the first thing that comes to mind musically that grabs your attention, that pricks the ears?
Well, obviously, any Beatles fan will know these two songs are part of the big Abbey Road medley on the B-side of Abbey Road, sometimes called the Long One, where we've got loads of tracks that in one way or another connect or reference each other. And Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight are a big part of that. They are both calling back to You Never Give Me Your Money, which is the beginning of the medley. And we can see that right off the bat with the chord progression, which for Golden Slumbers is A minor, D minor, G7 and C. So we have the, obviously for Golden Slumbers, and the D minor. And then to the C. That is exactly what happens at the beginning of You Never Give Me Your Money, but just with a different melody. So that's the A minor, D minor, G, and then C. So they're both sharing so much DNA, it makes so much sense for them to be in this big medley. So the medley isn't just a bunch of random songs sort of segued together. They are genuinely composed, well, on the most part, to live in that same universe.
And with Carry That Weight that we're also talking about, is that using the exact same DNA? Is that the exact same chords?
Yeah, so Carry That Weight also, it directly references You Never Give Me Your Money. It literally has that moment where the orchestra plays that melody, and then Paul sings a new verse to that same melody, which we don't hear in You Never Give Me Your Money. So it's at that point, it's not even like we technically are still in Carry That Weight, but it feels like we've just taken a little jump backwards to You Never Give Me Your Money, and then we teleport forward again to Carry That Weight to get to the oh, you've got to carry that weight, which is kind of all this song is. It is kind of just that little refrain, really.
Well, to understand why these songs share DNA, we should have a little bit of context about the writing and recording of the song.
Yes.
So, as we all know, Abbey Road, despite being recorded after Let It Be, is released before. And because the Let It Be album had been the ill-fated Get Back sessions, which were shelved for the time being because the band was fraught with tension, there was fighting, financial meetings. So Apple Corps, which was the company founded by the Beatles to sort of as a way to funnel their money to avoid a bit of tax, as well as to just have a sort of, a financial arm of the band. That's hemorrhaging money because of, really the Beatles' poor financial management. They are surrounded by yes men. They're surrounded by people, hangers-on, dropouts, hippies, and because of their own sensibilities towards them, they feel at one with them. They feel like the hippies themselves. They're dropouts. They're musicians. They're musos. So pretty much they're just giving away money at this point.
Yeah.
There are stories of people ordering caviar to the offices like it's a sandwich from the shops. People are ordering alcohol. people are getting given loans to go and record for Apple, which was going to become a record label with their favorite acts on it. And they're seeing these loans not as loans, but as gifts, which they then walk off with. So to stop the hemorrhaging of money, the Beatles realize that they need to get someone involved. Paul wants Lee Eastman, the father of his, at the time, girlfriend, Linda. He's a New York lawyer, an art collector, and he's a family of consultants. Think of him as sort of the high life New Yorker, Upper East Side, interested in the art world and in sort of the high circles.
Yeah.
While John has been sort of swooned and for this man called Alan Klein, who is the kind of opposite of that New York. Rather than the sort of Woody Allen high life New York, we've got the bruiser, the gangster, the wheeler dealer of Alan Klein, who has been managing the Rolling Stones since about 1965, and they fall out obviously about this, and that is a huge source of tension. As Paul is outvoted 3-1, they're going to go with Alan Klein, who Paul does not trust whatsoever. Whether he does help the Beatles is another question for another day. But while also that is going on, the tension is fraught, Yoko's presence and her influence over John is becoming more and more of a jealous point for the other Beatles, and takes a little bit of the fun, I think, out of making music with their friends. She's a constant presence since almost the White Album sessions. And they've had an unwritten rule up to this point of no wives, no girlfriends in the studio, despite the odd time where they invite them in for a party or for a specific recording. And George is fed up. He's wanting to record his songs. He doesn't feel like he's being listened to. And Ringo is probably a little bit bored of the fighting and also just wanting to have a bit more fun. So with this backdrop, they all agree to go back into Abbey Road rather than Twickenham Studios, rather than the Apple Studios where they tried to record the Get Back sessions. They would go back in with George Martin, who they had not used. They'd used Glenn Johns for the Get Back sessions. And they decided to go back in to record what they all gathered to be their final album. George had quit months earlier during the Get Back sessions. Ringo would quit during the White Album, and John would go on to quit merely months after this was recorded. So, with that context, it's winter in 1968, and all of this is going on, the fighting, the tension. Paul is back home in Liverpool in the house that he bought for his dad when the Beatles' money started rolling in. And as we know, Paul's mum has died early in his life. And his dad is remarried at this point, and he is sifting through his now stepsister's music book that sat on the piano at the house, and he stumbles across this lullaby written by the playwright Thomas Dekker in 1603, who was a contemporary of William Shakespeare, and it is called the Cradle Song. And on it says, "Golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles awake you when you rise, sleep pretty wantons, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby, rock them, lullaby." Paul, unable to read the sheet music, starts writing his own a new melody for it, and this goes on to become Golden Slumbers. Dave, could you describe to us the difference between these two? Because while Paul couldn't read sheet music, you can read sheet music, and you can sort of show us what he would have been looking at when he was sat in his dad's house.
Yeah, so as you said, he borrowed the words but couldn't read the music. Borrowing the words wasn't actually really an issue because the piece is so old. It's in what's called the public domain, so not protected by copyright anymore. But the original music is quite different. First of all, it's in what you call 3/4 time, which is a classic lullaby thing. It has that um-pa-pa sound to it, sort of very gentle. So I've got the tune here, and so you'll hear. It's quite weird to hear these lyrics set to a different tune. It's kind of hard to sing it because you're used to hearing them in a certain way, but I'll give it a go. So we have golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles awake you when you rise, sleep pretty maiden, do not cry, and I will sing a lullaby. So it's got a far more sort of classic nursery rhyme sound to it, and obviously, and I believe the tune here isn't as old as the words. I think this tune was composed later on. I think the words were written by Thomas Dekker for a play, and I don't know at the time whether it would have just been one of those things where in the play it says, stage direction, so-and-so sings this lullaby, and the tune may have been something just kind of made up on the spot and not notated. So at some later point, someone, I don't actually know who, set it to this melody, and then at some later point after that, Paul McCartney did that again.
So he's written this at his dad's house. It's so unfinished, is something that we would have to point out. It's another scrap, and they're known for having scraps of songs, the Beatles, loads of them. The famous one is A Day in the Life. And so he's got this little scrap called Golden Slumbers, as he calls it. And we can hear it on the Get Back documentary. We can see Paul McCartney playing it, working it out. He's writing it with Mal Evans at the piano. But he's also got another scrap of a song called Carry That Weight. And what do we know about that? This little scrap that then we all know he puts together with Golden Slumbers.
Yeah, well, in that same clip in the Get Back documentary, when he's playing Golden Slumbers at the piano, he also shows Carry That Weight. And at the time, he's imagining it being a more country and western sort of tune for Ringo, similar to their cover they did of Act Naturally, or even Yellow Submarine to a lesser extent, although you may not think of that as a country song. It's in the similar sort of or Ringo-esque style. And
could you show us that quickly, actually? Could you show us the sort of similarities between Carry That Weight and Yellow Submarine and that chorus, that sing-along?
So the main difference, well, it makes more sense now that we know that Paul originally envisioned Carry That Weight as being a Ringo tune. And we can see that in its chord progression. So the chord progression of Carry That Weight starts on what we call the 1 chord. So we're in the key of C, so it's a C. And then it goes to G, which is the 5 chord. So we have, in Carry That Weight, we have, boy, you're gonna carry that weight a long time. And then this is the same chord progression as, we all live in a yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow submarine. Boy, you're gonna carry that weight a long time. Only difference is that Yellow Submarine sort of swings along a little bit. And it's funny that Paul mentions country and western, because I think the song he was literally inspired by is Jambalaya on the Bayou by Hank Williams, which is the exact same chord progression as Carry That Weight, starting on C, then going to G for 2 bars, then coming back to C. So it's funny to hear, you can hear it in the Get Back series. Paul's also got a verse for it. And it's far that the verse really would have solidified this kind of country and western vibe. But all we get on the final Abbey Road record is the chorus of Carry That Weight, really. And this track really is just a chorus and then a bit of You Never Give Me Your Money and then back to that chorus. And that's the whole song, really. So an interesting musical tidbit from Golden Slumbers is if you listen to the early takes of it, which are available on one of the special editions, take 1 to 3 is the particular takes. Paul is mucking around just before he starts recording the piano intro from Golden Slumbers, and he goes to record this instead, which is basically the Fall on the Hill intro. And it's a very similar chord. If we get rid of the left hand, the right hand, well, on Fall on the Hill is playing a B minor 7, and Golden Slumbers plays an A minor 7. So they're virtually the same thing. It's just the left hand does something different. So whether that was Paul recycling that idea or he's just a fan of that sound, it's interesting how there's all of these little moments, all of these hallmarks that seem to be calling back to other things. He's channeled the Thomas Dekker poem. He's channeled some of his older material, potentially some country and western influence from Hank Williams. It's all coming into the pot.
They're very good at referencing themselves and sort of making jokes or being very quick to, self-reference, or like as in All You Need Is Love, the yeahs at the end. Glass Onion is a song all about referencing themselves. But they're very quick to pick up on what they've done before. Even in the explanation for Carry That Weight, it's a song like Act Naturally. They do remember and they do think about their work a lot.
because they change their sound a lot over the time. I imagine they almost think of it as little periods, little styles. So when Paul was referencing, oh, it's like Act Naturally, it's like that's one of the Beatles' modes, is that country and western mode that they used for songs like that. Whereas they have their sort of more rock and roll mode, and they have their more sort of psychedelic mode. They all have these different flavors they go around.
Yeah, I think the original idea was that the character in Carry That Weight would have a good life on paper, but he would be miffed by certain things going wrong, such as the yolk cracks in his egg, and then he'll be sort of down, and he'll have to sing, "Oh, you got to carry that weight a long time." Sort of a jokey.
It was going to be light-hearted and silly, as Paul often writes for Ringo. But what we got in the end was actually quite a sort of epic-sounding, moving sentiment of you got to carry that weight, you got to keep going.
So that's interesting. He's got these two scraps of songs, and then he goes, actually, and it's documented that he wants to create this long melody, this long medley, on side 2 of Abbey Road. So he puts them together, as he had done with A Day in the Life, as he goes on to do with Band on the Run, or Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey on his solo records. And he thinks that these two mashed together, and with the addition of You Never Give Me Your Money, that's when the idea of the second half of Abbey Road sort of comes into fruition. And then I think it's just a great way of the others being able to throw in their little scraps of songs, and it's Paul's work that weaves them all together.
Yeah, it's almost what they were going for with Sgt. Pepper to a certain extent. Sgt. Pepper began as this project envisioned by Paul, where it would be this one kind of big masterwork, but we only really get that with those transitions between the opening track and With a Little Help, and then later on there's another transition after the reprise, but that's kind of it, and the concept stops. Whereas on Abbey Road, on the second side, they actually do fulfill this vision, which I believe was very much egged on by George Martin, who thought that they should do something more inspired by classical music, more symphonic, and with a greater scheme where ideas are brought in and brought back again, motifs develop and are, recapitulated.
Because that's interesting, because they had been flirting with the idea of, or flirting with the classical music scene, let's say. Paul McCartney had done the score for The Family Way with George Martin, although I think George Martin probably had a lot of hand in that. And also their Never Heard, we're all waiting on it, the Carnival of Light score for the Royal Albert Hall. Was that a performance?
I'm not sure exactly what it was, but yeah, that's the one big missing track that everyone talks about, and it's probably now been hyped up so much that Paul can't release it because it's not very good, maybe. But maybe one day he'll release that.
So going on to the recording of Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, the song, interestingly enough, was recorded without John Lennon, who a few days earlier had a car crash in the Highlands of Scotland. He was known for not being a very good driver, John. And he was holidaying in the Highlands when I think a tourist was on the wrong side of the road. He veered off the road. He required many stitches, as did Yoko. Her daughter Kyoko and Julian was in shock. And he was in hospital for about 5 days. He did tell reporters, if you're going to crash, then do it in the Highlands. The hospital is fantastic. So while John's recovering, Paul, Ringo and George, as they do, they never miss a beat. They're into the studio to begin or continue work on Abbey Road, because they had started it a few months earlier with songs like I Want You, She's So Heavy. So they lay down the rhythm track with Paul on piano, Ringo on the drums, and George on the Fender 6 bass, or 6-string bass, somewhat between a guitar and a bass guitar.
Yeah.
They have an overdub session where they add more vocals. Paul has a few attempts at the perfect vocal take. He wants it soft in the lullaby section. Once there was a way to get back homeward, but he wants the Golden Slumbers bit to be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting story. They come in one day ready to continue working on it, and the engineers are listening to the Wimbledon women's final between Britain's Anne Jones and America's Billie Jean King. The Beatles go, "Oh, not interested," but end up asking for it to be beamed into the recording room for them to listen, which is a good story. So there is Beatles recordings with excerpts of the Wimbledon final out there.
Oh, right.
And then they record the orchestra, with Paul playing a main role in this, with the other Beatles not in attendance, which I think is telling of the sort of way they worked in those days and by that time. Is Paul is wanting to be in control of that while the others are not particularly interested.
Yeah, it's becoming, well, people say it sort of began around the White Album era. It's becoming lots of little solo projects, really. Of course, this is a medley. The songs are literally getting bound together from different authors. So it isn't completely solo projects, but they're becoming, George, Paul and John are becoming almost their own separate entities at this point.
And I think John never had much say in the sort of strings or the orchestral arrangements of his songs. He sort of put his trust in George Martin, while Paul was a little bit more of a control freak. He wanted to be in control of all of it. And it is said that he produced this session himself because it was such an undertaking. They had to have all the cables run from Studio 2 control room of Abbey Road, where the Beatles record, all the way to Studio 1, which is where they normally do orchestral recordings, because Studio 1 didn't have an 8-track recorder. So it was a technical
challenge,
yes. Tell us what is happening musically in Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight. We obviously have the weaving in and out of You Never Give Me Your Money, but we also have some interesting moments. We've got timpanis in there, and we've got guitar solos from George Harrison. Can you just give it a little bit more explanation about what goes on?
Yeah, so let's start with Golden Slumbers. Both of these songs, Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, they are fragments of songs. So their structures are really interesting and unusual. And I imagine if they had become their own separate songs, Paul would have fleshed out the structure more. But Golden Slumbers has this sort of verse, which is the sort of Once There Was a Way. And then, of course, we have the big Golden Slumbers moment. Golden slumbers fill your eyes, which feels like a big chorus. But then before we know it, we're back to the tail of the verse. Little baby, don't cry, and I will sing a lullaby. So it's all kind of weaving together. The structure is very fluid, but that's kind of in the spirit of this medley. It's all meant to be little moments and vignettes. A little interesting moment that happens musically is a random bar of 2 beats. So this song is in 4/4 time, which is a fancy way of saying it has 4 beats in every bar, which is almost like the musical default of just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Nothing special there. But something that the Beatles often did is throw in little random changes in the meter, changes in the time signature. And we get that at the end of each verse. We get a bar of 2. So we have the... to get back home, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you notice in there was a moment I only counted up to 2 and then I went back to 1 again. It's sort of hidden in plain sight, and you could count it as like a big bar of 6 if you wanted to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. But in modern music, maybe it's the prevalence of using computers and software where you're kind of stuck in 4/4 time. With modern songs, you don't get these little moments of change, whereas the Beatles and their contemporaries would often let the meter change. It's almost like the meter followed the melody instead of the other way around. If you needed 2 more beats, then you sang 2 more beats, and that was that.
So you think that was purely on feel that Paul had written the song, and it wasn't a conscious decision?
100%. I think songs of this ilk, the Beatles in particular, it's like they were chasing a melody, and the melody didn't necessarily want to stay in this rigid form of 4/4. Whereas if you're writing kind of more groove-based music, dance-based music, then you almost start with the groove of 4/4 and then work from there. So melody was king with the Beatles, and that often meant odd meters occurred. So Carry That Weight, you know the moment that's begun, it just sort of kicks in. Oh, you've got to carry that weight. And in quite an unusual move for the Beatles, that vocal is being sang as as what you could call a gang vocal. It's just all unison. They're all singing the same line, whereas famously the Beatles love their harmonies. So usually they'd all be singing a different pitch, and together they'd be creating this lush chord, this lush harmony. But instead, they're all singing the same line, and it gives it kind of a chant, almost like football crowd sound to it, because that's what people do in like a football crowd. They're all singing the same tune all together, and it gets you all sort of railed up. It feels very powerful. So we just have these two chords, the two chords I was talking about earlier that are from Yellow Submarine, and also Jambalaya on the Bow by Hank Williams, which is maybe where he got them from. And then that's kind of carried the weight through and through. It's just those two chords. Of course, in the middle, as sort of the filling of the sandwich, we climb down to which is of course directly lifted from You Never Give Me Your Money. And I imagine, particularly because this moment is all orchestral, it's performed by the orchestra, I imagine George Martin may have given a little helping hand with working out how to splice that in there, because it's quite a feat, this part of the medley. It all starts heating up earlier in the medley with things like Sun King. It doesn't even really feel like a medley. It just feels like a few randomly related songs. But near this end here, it's really coming together as a sophisticated bit of arrangement.
My favourite part of the song, in Carry That Weight, or even Golden Slumbers, is when the orchestra and the trumpets play the melody to You Never Give Me Your Money, and then it comes into George's guitar solo after.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great moment. Yeah,
you mentioned earlier to myself before we start recording that solo is on the Leslie speaker, is that right?
Yeah, it's on a rotating Leslie speaker, which I didn't know much about. So I went and looked it up, and I watched someone actually use a Leslie speaker. And it's literally just a speaker that has a rotating speaker in it and drum in it, and it just tumbles that sound around like it's in a dryer.
Yeah,
and it means
it's
it gives
amazing.
It that sort of warbly, twisty thing. I'd never seen one of them.
They're traditionally used with Hammond organ. They're almost sort of, you can't imagine a Hammond organ without a Leslie speaker. But yeah, they're literally a rotating speaker, and the physics of it rotating creates that wobbly sound. And around this period, the Beatles were very keen on putting different things through the Leslie speaker. They've put their vocals through it before, and on Here Comes the Sun as well, on the same album, George puts his electric guitar through the Leslie on that as well.
We've spoken about the music of Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight. Should we look at the lyrics?
Yes.
Because whether he meant it or not, if looking at these lyrics, I think there is a lot to be unpacked about what is happening within the Beatles at this time. A lot of people say that they don't deliberately write about themselves, but it sort of comes out in the sort of phrases and the words that they use. So, as we said, Paul had written the melody over this poem from the 1600s, but he did have a little scrap of song which is unrelated, which is the Once There Was a Way to Get Back Homeward. That is all Paul. He had that first chord, first line already written, and then he sort of tacked it onto this poem melody that he had. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry. The line Once There Was a Way to Get Back Homeward, I think Paul himself has said that it was his desire to get home, to leave London, to leave these meetings, these endless business meetings, these arguments, these petty squabbles, and to just get back to sort of the safety of his dad and the nostalgia of being back, not quite in Liverpool, but pretty much in Liverpool. So it's about escaping, which I think is interesting, that Paul, ever the optimist, he also was quite down. He probably took it more personally, this protracted troubles, than any of the other Beatles.
Yeah. Well, I think he really, you see it in the Get Back documentary, which is a similar period of time. He was getting really quite hurt by where the band was going, and the writing, as you said, was almost on the wall with the band isn't going to be around much longer. So in writing this, even if they weren't completely sure this is going to be our last album, it's quite sort of amazing, really, that the Beatles managed to write such a perfect thematic ending to their career, with all of this thought of looking back and carrying that weight, and then of course literally ending on a song called The End. It's very it feels very well planned out, but how much they knew, it's hard to tell.
And as you mentioned there, that line, "carry that weight," that's a great sentiment, a great message that Paul's trying to say. We've got to carry that weight a long time. You can look at it as in a good thing or a bad thing. Is he saying we are going to have to carry this weight? It's an endless weight of pressure, and it's getting too much, and it feels like it's never going to end. Or is he sort of talking about we're going to carry it, we're going to keep going forever and ever, nothing's going to weigh us down? And I suppose it's the burden of carrying the weight of the Beatles and the achievements, and it's
Very
probably going
much.
to be on them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So the song is released as part of Abbey Road, the album. The album, as all Beatles albums do, debuts at number 1 in the British UK charts. It's there for 11 weeks before being replaced by the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. Then goes to number 1 in America after 3 weeks and staying there for 11. It's the Beatles' farewell. It's the orchestral climax to their last album. I think that's the way that we can look at Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight.
For sure. But then the weird thing is, obviously, Let It Be came out afterwards, although it had been recorded before. So the fans at the time didn't necessarily get the message that this is the end, because they knew that there was something else in the pipeline. And they didn't necessarily know that the band were about imminently going to break up. So whether they realised how true the messages in this outro are at the time is hard to say.
I think, to me, it sounds like Paul's acceptance that the band is finished. The one that had tried to cling on the most, while the others have been interested in other things. John, felt it was stifling his creativity. George certainly did with his own songwriting. John was going on to, defeat the evils of the world and imagine there's no possessions. Paul always just wanted to be a Beatle, and he wanted to constantly be a Beatle. And it took a while for him to accept that. He took a while to come around to the idea of never touring again. And then when Brian Epstein died, he got them straight back into the studio to make a film, Magical Mystery Tour. And this is his sort of salvaging their spirit for a final hurrah. And you can hear it, as he said, in the gang vocal, sort of all in unison, which is the only contribution John makes to this song, I believe, is that vocal. And we were talking off camera. It's symbolic that Paul, in his most recent tours, has been finishing his shows with Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, and the end.
Yeah. Well, and obviously it makes for a fantastic ending to a show. And Paul, if you look at Paul's modern set list, he's obviously focused on making it a good rock show. With those dueling guitar solo at the end of the end. But it's also thematically, as you said, perfect way to end a show, a tour, and a career, basically.
Yeah, that's the point, because although he keeps defying expectations and keeps playing stadiums and arenas all around the world, there's probably an acceptance that there's not going to be many more tours. I thought when we saw him in December 2024 that would be the last time I would ever see him. I've seen him a few times now. Yet he seems like he's coming around again for another round of tours.
You never know, and we're sort of in uncharted territory a little bit, because we're getting to that time now with these 60s icons like Paul McCartney or Bob Dylan, where they're getting obviously very old now, but they're still going, and with modern tech and making sure they've got all the luxuries they need, they can kind of just keep going until they just decide I'm not well enough. But yeah, I guess Paul never knows for sure when his last tour will be, so he wants to make sure whatever happens, he goes out on a bang with this fantastic medley.
Absolutely. And the song being maybe not one of the Beatles' most popular, but I definitely think one of the Beatles' most poignant, which has meant that it's lent itself to cover versions. A couple of them, it's on the Sing film soundtrack, sang by Jennifer Hudson. Dua Lipa has even done a cover on an acoustic EP. But the one that would probably stick in most people's minds, especially here in the UK, would be Elbow's cover for the John Lewis advert.
Yeah, because of course the John Lewis advert, for any non-Brits listening, is notorious for covering a song in a sort of very warm and nostalgic way, and it will always enter the charts, and it will be a bit of a hit. We had a Real Love performed by Tom O'Dowd a few years prior, I think, for a John Lewis advert, which is obviously a Beatles tune. But Golden Slumbers is kind of obvious as a choice, because if you're choosing, in a cynical minded way I'm thinking now, if you're choosing a song to fit an advert, which is going to be about a minute long, you go for one of the shortest Beatles songs, which is Golden Slumbers, because of course it's only really a fragment of a wider piece.
Mm-hmm. And one final thing I wanted to touch on just before we left about this song is in the early Simpsons episode, Lisa's Pony, there's an instrumental version of the song. Homer is pretty much falling asleep at the wheel because he's so tired. I think he's working 2 jobs in it to try and buy Lisa's daughter a pony. And an instrumental version plays while he goes off to Dreamland, and it's like he's floating on a bed in the moon.
I know the episode you mean. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's great. My colleague mentioned it to me, and it's a great little scene. But when you actually know that Conan O'Brien was a writer and producer for The Simpsons at the time, and he recently did the recent Rest is History podcast all about the Beatles. So that's maybe him imparting his super fandom onto The Simpsons. And
I imagine they had to pay some money for that, so they could have easily put in a very cheap or even free, like the classic lullaby, Brahms's Lullaby, public domain, obvious thing to put on when a character's falling asleep, but they probably paid a good sum of money just to have that brief moment of the Beatles.
Yeah, and then obviously them, Paul and George appearing, and Ringo all appearing.
Ringo was the first Beatle on The Simpsons. He was one of the first celebrities on The Simpsons.
Ah, was he? I didn't even know
not
that.
the very first, but one of the first.
George joins. He's seen in The Simpsons when he's in the car and they're doing the sort of the Beatles
tribute, the B Sharps, the barbershop quartet. Yeah.
And Paul and Linda are the vegetarians that try and that speak to Lisa about becoming vegetarian.
And did you know that a thing that Paul McCartney decided is he'd only go on The Simpsons if Lisa remained a vegetarian. He wasn't just for one episode. She would have to remain a vegetarian for the whole series, which they have done. So, sticking to his values there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know that at all. When did Ringo appear, just quickly?
It was an early episode. It's becoming un-Simpsons right now, but it's an early episode where Marge used to have a crush on Ringo and used to paint all these portraits of him, and she mailed it off to Ringo, but he never got back. But it's just famous. Ringo is famous for always replying to his fan mail. It recently, about 10 years ago now, I guess, Ringo famously announced, "No more fan mail. I've had too much fan mail." But in the episode, it's just because Ringo has spent the last 30 years replying to fan mail that he hadn't got around to Marge's one. Finally, he gets around to it, sends it back to her, and it gives her the jolt of inspiration she needs. But yeah, that's a great episode.
Well, we'll look at more Simpsons episodes, I'm sure, in another episode of UnBeatled. But that's it. Thank you, Dave, for this. This is Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight. Next time, we are going to be doing All My Loving, the 1963 song from With the Beatles. But until then, please go and like, subscribe, comment to UnBeatled with David Bennett and Donnie Campbell on YouTube. And yeah, we'll see you the next time we're out.
Thank you very much.